face of God, the face of God. I hold you in my heart, you in my heart. You are a part of me, a part of me. You are the face of God, the face of God. You are the face of God.
Eres la luz de Dios.
I hold you in my heart.
Eres la cara del amor.
You are a part of me. You are the face of God. You are the face of God. You are the face of God. You are the face of God.
Sei la luce di Dio.
You are the face
You
of
are
God.
the face of God.
You are the face
Tu
of
es
God.
l'image de Dieu.
You are the face
You
of
are the face of God.
You are the face
Oh,
of
c'est
God.
la luz de Dios.
You are the face
You
of God.
are the face of God.
You are the face
Tu
of God.
es judoí.
You are the face
You
of
are the face of God.
You are the face of
Eres
God.
la luz de Dios.
You are the face of God.
I'll light a candle in your memory, though I don't know who you are. And when I think about your family, I will wish upon a star. And I pray that they'll find peace someday. I pray they'll make it through. I'll light a candle in your memory to honor you. I'll light a candle for America. May we feel peace inside. We'll hold each other closer and wipe the tears we've cried. And I pray we'll bond together, and I pray that we'll pull through. I'll light a candle for America, for me and for you. And we will light the world with our love. I know that we will light the world with our love, with our love. I'll light a candle for humanity, for the good that's yet to come, as we overlook our differences and join now as one. And I pray we'll come out stronger in this world I'm dreaming of. I'll light a candle for humanity, to be a world living in love. candle for humanity, for all the good that's yet to come, as we overlook our differences and join now as one. And I pray we'll come out stronger in this world I'm dreaming of. I'll light a candle for humanity, to be a world that's living in love. I'll light a candle. I'll light a candle. I'll light a candle. You are the heart, you are the hands, you are the voice of spirit on earth, and who you are, and all you do is a blessing to the world. You are the heart, you are the hands, you are the voice of spirit on earth, and who you are and all you do is a blessing to the world. You are the heart, you are the hands, you are the voice of spirit on earth, and who you are and all you do is a blessing to the world. We are the heart, we are the hands, we are the voice of spirit on earth, and who we are and all we do is a blessing to the world. We are the heart, we are the hands, we are the voice of spirit on earth, and who we are and all we do is a blessing to the world. I am the heart, I am the hands, I am the voice of spirit on earth, and who I am and all I do is a blessing to the world. I am the heart, I am the hands, I am the voice of spirit on earth, and who I am and all I do is a blessing to the world. I'm a blessing to the world. I'm a blessing to the. I am the heart. I am the hands. I am the heart. I am the hands. You are the heart. You are the hands. You are the heart. You are the hands. We are the heart. We are the hands. We are the heart. We are the hands. I am the heart. I am the hands. I am the heart. I am the hands. You are the heart. You are the hands. You are the heart. You are the.
Welcome back. And indeed, we have just been blessed. Reverend Stamper really gave us quite a bit to think about and how to make a difference in the world. That the options that he described were wonderful, but absolutely would require us to continue to work and to truly, truly learn how to live our truth. Thank you. We are moving into a new session, and this session is being presented by what I call one of my favorite truth tellers. The name of the session, the title of the session is Normal White People. This workshop, using real and untold American history, current events, and self-reflection, will require us to uncover our own biases, to discover the changes that are necessary within us, and create a path of inspired actions that shifts your habituated patterns from drama to curiosity. Talking about making a difference. The presenter is Lola Wright, Reverend Lola Wright, Chicago born and built, as she describes herself, with a deep appreciation and understanding for all of the city's complexities. Lola grew up in the wealth and privilege of private schools, country clubs, and manicured neighborhoods, yet she always sensed something was missing. She sought aliveness and freedom in music, immersing herself in the hip hop and house scenes of the 90s in Chicago. And then at 18, a pregnancy. By 22, the mother of two young children and living in a volatile and insecure environment. A year later, she was on her own, determined to create a new experience. An ordained minister with a gift for weaving together the mystical and material. She has served for many years as the CEO of Bodhi Center, an organization committed to personal transformation, collective awakening, conscious activism, and community building. Her work has taken her to stages around the world as a speaker and vocalist, including the Agape International Spiritual Center, Harvard Divinity School, TEDx Chicago Ideas, and Havana Jazz Festival. Lola's path has included some stops at some of the world's leading global financial institutions and technology startups, training in several well-respected coaching methodologies, and experience as an entrepreneur, all culminating in her desire to challenge people. And this afternoon, it's challenging us to live fierce and loving lives. She loves nothing more than creating unexpected encounters that shake up what you thought you knew. This includes more than 300 live events since 2014. Let us get ready to welcome my friend and truly one of my favorite truth tellers, Lola Wright. Hey Lola, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here and right back at you. I love Reverend Jackie Atkins. She is someone who sees people, and I have appreciated her ability and willingness to see me in spite of my like different style, perhaps. So thank you for having me. And I've officially become one of those people who has too long a bio. So yikes. Welcome. I'm glad you're here with me today. Before we get started, I always like to remind us that a 1-hour conversation on race in America is simply inadequate. So I make no promises on what is going to shift or change in your life as a result of 1 hour of us being together in a conversation about race. What I do intend on doing is inviting you into a commitment, a lifestyle practice, not something that is led, guided, and directed by the drama in the human condition, but rather lives as a kind of imperative in your being. So today is just a little taste of my journey in the conversation of race, and I hope it inspires you to deepen your availability for the conversation, your interest in the conversation, your responsibility for the conversation. So there is a, my experience, we're used to talking about love, especially in the New Thought movement, in a particular kind of way. And I think it's a very narrow sliver of the word love. And I will always invite you into what I call a fierce love. I love the articulation that Rocco Errico uses in Let There Be Light when he talks about the root of the word love. The root of the word love, well, the Aramaic translation is huba, and it comes from the Semitic root ha or hav, which means to set on fire. One of my great influences is a man named Ernest Holmes, and he articulates the definition of love as the fire of the universe. We've been habituated in our culture to think of love as meek, as tender, and that is just one very narrow aspect of love. The conversation of race in America, the state of racial injustice in America, is calling for a fierce love. It's not a nice love. It's not a Minnesota nice love. It's not a polite love. It is the fire of the universe that is nearer than your breath. Huba, to set on fire. So I hope that I invite you into that kind of exploration today. Now, you know, I have been in the conversation of race since I was a little girl. I grew up in a very, very white community with a lot of affluence, and Michael Jordan would golf at the country club that we belonged to. And I always asked my dad, like, why doesn't he belong to the country club? He loves to golf at the country club, and this was the 80s and 90s in Chicago. He was the man. And my dad said, well, he can't belong to the country club because he's Black. Now, at the time, only white Christian men could belong to the country club. Instantly, I was provoked by that. And that was as a little kid. From that point forward, I just perpetually and voraciously ingested the history of this country and felt really, really called to have explicit conversations around race in America. Now, in 2016, at the presidential election, the day following the presidential election, I took my kids to school. And, you know, I know that there's sensitivity around not wanting to collapse social issues with politics, and I think that's almost impossible. So you may find yourself over the course of this next hour feeling triggered and reactive. And my request is that you take responsibility for that and that you breathe through the experience. I'm not going to ask you to agree with everything that I say. I am going to ask you to consider everything that I offer. When I arrived at my children's school the morning after the 2016 presidential election, I was met with droves of white women weeping, in tears, in shock that Donald Trump could get elected in the United States of America. And I was quite startled, to be frank. I was surprised by their surprise. Now, of course, if you look at the statistics of that election, 53% of college-educated white women voted for Donald Trump. That's my recollection of that statistic. An overwhelming number of white women were comfortable with that. It's important to realize this is not a party conversation, but the rhetoric of that campaign was deeply, violently, and profoundly based on racism and bigotry. And statistically, white Americans were very comfortable turning a blind eye. You and I are students of the subconscious mind. You and I understand that you cannot shift what you cannot accept. Until we are willing to have an understanding of the racism that occupies our being, it will never lift. So I want to invite you into increased comfort around that if you are white identified. As a result of that experience, I formed a project called Normal White People. It was incubated to support white identified people in developing their racial consciousness. It has occurred only as a white affinity space. And I could go into lots of details, but we don't have enough space for that today. I want to introduce you to the course commitments for normal white people. And while we are doing this, I want to encourage you in the comments section and/or on a journal beside you to notice any triggers that come up, because the nature of my work is really to invite you into your IQ, your cognitive capacity, your EQ, your emotional capacity, and your BQ, your body intelligence. So IQ, EQ, BQ, most of us spend most of the time in our IQ. It is what we value most in this culture. But there is a growing body of work in the space of emotional intelligence and an even more prolific body of work emerging in body intelligence. If we are to deconstruct racism in America, it will not happen at the level of our analysis. It is stored deeply in our bodies. It is a kind of cellular memory, and we are all living in a traumatic aftermath and present experience, right? So if you only do the work of understanding racism, racism will remain present and intact. So here are the course commitments that we share in Normal White People. And I'd love for you to notice as I read them where you feel the need to oppose or where you can sense in your body a reactivity. It's perfectly acceptable to acknowledge your reactivity. Where we get tripped up is when you and I can't take responsibility or don't have awareness around our reactivity. So we do not debate or defend the existence of racism in America. If that's where you're having the conversation, whether or not it's alive and well, I'm not the girl for you, nor is this class. I want you to come into this experience with a humility and an acceptance that racism in America is alive and well. We acknowledge that racism exists. We show up for the conversation of race in America. Inside of white culture, the pattern is to avoid the conversation of race in America. Now, it's unfortunate for many of the people I can find myself in the company of. My very favorite conversations are race, religion, sex, and politics. Oh, and your soul. If you have an area of life that is uncomfortable for you to explore, it is worthy of consideration. So if the conversation of race in America or racism in America begins to have you get all kinds of uncomfortable, which by the way is very typical in white culture, then there you see is your growth edge, is your opportunity for learning. We examine and deconstruct racism in America through the lens of oneness. Many of the conversations around race in America are occurring in a drama trance. where it really is inside of a seduction of separation. My invitation is for you and I to be inside of this conversation through the lens of oneness. And I believe that we can hold multiple realities at once. We can understand that we are intrinsically connected one to another while realizing in this dimension of reality, we have a dis-ease. We trust that the facilitation team is a team of allies. When I bring up uncomfortable topics, I all of a sudden become your opponent in your perception of reality. It is a spiritual practice to know that I am here in service of evolution, in service of awakening. I will tell you that the work of being an advocate for race education, as someone who has committed myself to having robust and necessary and inconvenient conversations on a regular basis around the state of race in America, I don't do that because it's fun and easy, right? So I'm asking you to trust that I am here in sacred service. I would love to talk to you about cooking. It would be my strong preference. But unfortunately, there's a soul's appointment. I have a kind of dharma around this. So really trust that I'm here as your ally. We do not prioritize comfort. In fact, we prioritize discomfort. That is counterintuitive for many of us in the New Thought movement. We prioritize awakening through discomfort. We take responsibility for our reactivity. And so that's my request of you today. If you notice yourself feeling reactive, take responsibility for that. And I'm going to give you a tool on how to do that. We acknowledge our defensiveness. We invoke curiosity. When we invoke curiosity, we're rising above our survival tendencies. We value learning over being right. We practice believing over debating. Here's what that means. When someone has an explicit experience of racism and they offer that experience up to you in service of your evolution, your education, your awareness, oftentimes as white identified people, if that's who you are, now, you know, of course we understand this is a gathering of people who have different racial identities. This is specifically for white identified people, not because all of this isn't applicable to Black and brown people, but because white people, I think, have a great growth edge around this conversation. And oftentimes white identified people will approach the conversation around racial injustice or racism in America as a debate, as opposed to surrendering and deferring to the experience of the person before you. We engage a whole body practice, including our IQ, our EQ, and our BQ. And I'm going to show you how we do that in a moment. We practice feeling our feelings through nonverbal body movement and sound. If racism doesn't cause an eruption of feeling in your being, then I don't know, I'd be like, check your pulse, honey. It is a loaded conversation. It is a trauma that the collective consciousness is caught in. And so it is loaded with feelings. And unless we're numbing our feelings out, they're fully present. Now, oftentimes we will go unconscious. We will feel our feelings and we will begin to blame and criticize. I'm asking you, whether you do this today or you do this ongoingly, to give yourself the gift of nonverbal body movement and sound. What that looks like for me is when I am confronted with an emotional experience, with a feeling, it may look like no words, just movement and sound. So throughout the course of this experience today, I want to ask you to take responsibility for moving your energy. Moving your energy. Feeling states last 90 seconds. They come in waves like contractions in and out, but they do not last for more than 90 seconds. Anything that's lasting for longer than 90 seconds is a mood. And we have a lot of moody people on the planet. We don't need you and me to be two more of those, right? So take responsibility for being in this conversation. I oftentimes say, loose knees and move your hips. We realize that humanity has been impacted by racism in America, and that impact occurs differently for each person. Oftentimes, the topic of race in America or racism in America is centering Black and brown people. I would like you to consider that race and racism in America is a largely white issue. Race and racism in America doesn't exist if white people don't maintain its existence. It was designed by white identified people, it is maintained by white identified people, and yet we're constantly looking to Black and brown people to explain racism to us. Well, wait a second. Ta-Nehisi Coates said, you know, racism is the father of race. Racism was constructed to basically divide people and maintain an echelon of wealth. So if we can have poor white people believe that they are superior to Black people, then we can have the people fighting against themselves. Important to remember that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated just before he was going to launch the Poor People's Campaign. The Poor People's Campaign existed to create a multiracial coalition. Because if you could get the populace to understand that they have been bamboozled, then you could actually create change, right? So racism was formed to separate and divide people. And then race was constructed to support racism, an important distinction. I want to encourage you to share your thoughts in the chat. If at any time anything here is leaving you with a question, we'll have time at the end. I'll be able to review some of those. Here is the body awareness practice I want you to invoke in your journey around the topic of race and racism. And this is a global practice. All human beings on the planet would benefit from this. In this now moment, I want you to tune into your body. Maybe take a deep breath. Move your body a little bit. Even if you're seated, just move your body a little bit and scan your body. What do you notice? In this now moment, I notice swirling in my belly. I notice a pulling in my left shoulder. And I notice a buzzing in my arms. Again, we are doing this as a practice to bring our awareness to our body so that we can take responsibility for our reactivity. Notice as I tuned into my body, I didn't articulate any story about that. I didn't say, wow, there's a pulling in my left shoulder because I did a fair amount of weightlifting this morning at CrossFit. Nope, we don't actually know that, nor is it helpful. So we're just bringing our awareness into this now moment. What's here now? I'm going to ask you to stick to 5 core feeling states: anger, sadness, joy, fear, or sexual creative energy. So in this now moment, I feel a sense of joy. Joy is here now. You might have a cocktail of feelings. I'd love for you to chime in the chat right now. What are you noticing in your body sensations and your feeling states? Resist the urge to explain why. Resist the urge to attach a story. We're just becoming aware of what's occurring in this now moment so that we can move beyond our reactivity. And then what's the thought? Go ahead and drop that in the chat. Body sensations, feeling states, next thought. Now, many of you are aware, because Ernest Holmes has used this term, treat and move your feet. And you may realize that that comes out of the Quaker tradition, and the saying was pray and move your feet. Denying racism doesn't change anything. Claiming colorblindness doesn't change anything. Thinking about racism doesn't change anything. Worrying about racism, unfortunately, it doesn't change anything. Wondering about racism doesn't change anything. I think we have had more Black authors with anti-racist educational texts on the New York Times bestseller list in the last year since George Floyd's murder than perhaps we have had in history. And while it is noble to increase your awareness through education, just wondering actually doesn't change anything. What does change something is learning, then growing, and changing changes everything. It turns out that thinking makes very little difference. So this is the quote that I open all of my normal white people work with. And it is from a book called So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Olu. She says, white people, I don't want you to understand me better. Now she's a Black woman. So she's saying, I don't want you to understand me better. I want you to understand yourselves. Your survival, white people, has never depended on your understanding of white culture. In fact, it's required your ignorance. Now, we could spend several weeks, months, and years deconstructing this, but I'd love for you to drop in the chat, what is it that you think this may be speaking to? White people, I don't want you to understand me better as a Black woman. I want you to understand yourselves. Come to understand, how did you get to be as you are? How does this culture exist as it does? That is a function of whiteness. So I'd love to ask you this question, and oftentimes people want more prompting, but I'm not going to give it to you. The question is this, and my request is that you drop it in the chat. How do you identify? That's all I'm going to give you. As a human being, in this dimension of reality, what is your identity? How do you identify? I'm going to take a minute and I want to see what we're saying in the chat. So please go ahead and say what's true for you. How do you identify? Gay, white, cis, male. Great. Anyone else available to speak their identity into the chat? An African American woman. Great. Gay male. Great. So how do I identify? Lucky to be white. Okay. I identify as African American or African heritage woman. Great. Straight male. Great. Spiritual being and African American female. Senior white woman. Great. Oftentimes what I find in my work when I ask this question is it'll be sort of like white, Caucasian, you know, it's like a really funny phenomenon. And that has become, there's an increasing awareness over the last couple of years, but in my experience, Black and brown people don't approach that inquiry with the same kind of hesitancy or reluctance. There's usually like, oh, this is how I identify. White people have a very interesting relationship to that question. So we have someone saying here, biracial, white and Native American, senior woman, privileged race, seen as a pig. That's a context, right? So my question for you, Marlene, would be like, is that what's true for you? Do you see yourself as a pig, or are you suggesting that the world sees you as a pig because of your race? I'd love to understand what you're saying more there. It's important to realize that white identified people have always been involved in racial justice movements in this country. And so if your only context for being white is that of real horror, I'd love for you to take some time and responsibility for understanding the essential and present roles that white people have had in racial justice movements in this country. Oh, okay. So what does this word whiteness mean? All the aspects of being white. Oftentimes we will refer to this idea of being white as merely physical differences. It's a lot deeper than that. Whiteness involves what is granted and how it is granted. To examine whiteness is to focus on how racism elevates white people. And that would be a great inquiry for white identified people to take on. How has racism elevated me? Now, oftentimes what will happen among white people is a kind of like, well, my family was poor, we didn't have a lot. And again, remember, the course commitment is resist the urge to be defensive. Resist the urge to debate. If you notice that tendency arising in you, take responsibility for feeling your feelings through nonverbal body movement and sound, and ask the question again. Huh. How has racism elevated white people? How has racism elevated me as a white person? And we're just wanting to develop some language and some capacity around that. So perhaps you're familiar with some of these statistics. I imagine some of you have read more anti-racist material in the last 8 months than perhaps you have historically. So some of these statistics are increasingly in the foreground. But in 2016, 2017, the racial breakdown of institutional control looks like this. 10 richest Americans, 100% white, 7 of whom are among the richest in the world. US Congress, 90% white. US governors, 96% white. Top military advisors, 100% white. President and vice president, prior to this current election, 100% white. US Freedom Caucus, 100% white. US presidential cabinet, 91% white. So remember, if whiteness is beyond just mere physical differences, but in fact it includes what is granted, how it is granted, and then that racism elevates white people, what do you imagine the impact is of institutional control being overwhelmingly, in some cases, exclusively white? Now we could look at other industries too. Media decision makers in the music industry, 95% white. In the TV business, 93% white. Books, 90% white. News, 85% white. Teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's professional football teams, 97% white. It is important for us to get honest about the impact of that. Now, what do you think that yields? We can look at these statistics. Black people now constitute nearly 1 million of the total 2.3 million incarcerated population. You could either say something's wrong with Black people, or you could say something's wrong with the system. I choose the latter. It is very clear if you look at the data, if you look at policy, if you look at systems, if you look at structures, Black people are incarcerated at nearly 6 times the rate of white people. Together, Black and Latinx people comprised 58% of all prisoners in 2008, even though Black and Latinx people make up approximately 1/4 of the US population. Now, as you read this, you may be having a couple different experiences. One could be a sense of fury, upset, sadness, heartbreak. Keep breathing, be with that. Another could be shock. Perhaps this is new information to you. And again, watch for the tendency to debate or defend. Now, if Black and Latinx people were incarcerated at the same rates of white people, today's prison and jail populations would decline by approximately 50%. My co-founder of Normal White People is an old friend of mine. He and I met when I was 16. He grew up on the west side of Chicago. He's a Black man. And he has spent his entire career in the advertising business. He is responsible for bringing hip hop culture to mainstream advertising. And as he reminds me very frequently, racism is good for business. If you are someone who has influence over the business community, you have an explicit responsibility to untangle from that experience. How could it be that racism is good for business? Well, if you have a society that's based on the lie of separation, then you create a lot more of it, right? So now we have a prison industrial complex. About 14 million white people and 2.6 million Black people report using an illicit drug. 5 times as many white people are using drugs as Black people. Yet Black people are sent to prison for drug offenses at 10 times the rate of white people. Now, you may also be having the experience while hearing some of these statistics of like, well, what am I supposed to do? In my experience, our first step is to get with the facts. Can you actually just be with the what's so? Remember at the beginning of this conversation, I said, you cannot shift what you cannot accept. And if any part of us is still debating or defending this evidence, we're going to stay in this suffering loop. So for me, talking about race matters because it's a pain body in this country. It is something that creates profound suffering, and I would argue it is impeding the evolution of humanity. It is as if we are in a trauma loop and we keep re-injuring ourselves over and over and over again. So I'd like for you to respond in the chat if you would. Why does talking about race matter to you? You know, I can tell you why it matters to me, but I think that you're not going to be able to sustain a commitment to talking about race or racism in the United States of America if you don't have a personal reason for why it matters. So for me, it matters because I feel a kind of moral mandate. I cannot be a practitioner of the philosophy of oneness and then turn a blind eye to the statistics I just shared with you. That is a breach of my own personal integrity, and I'd like for you to consider that it is a breach of your integrity also. You and I are co-creating this human experience, and both through statistical evidence and through anecdotal conversation with Black and brown people in your world, you can get a lot of support for the reality of racism in America. So I cannot, as someone who says I am devoted to the philosophy of oneness, I am a practitioner of the philosophy of oneness, I am a minister of the philosophy of oneness, I am a teacher of the philosophy of oneness, just pretend like something isn't happening. There is a dis-ease in the consciousness of humanity. So I would love to hear from you. And again, just see, why is it important to you to develop the willingness to talk about race in America? So Jackie Atkins says, I want racism to be dismantled so that we can truly appreciate our unity and the world can manifest peace. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the metaphysical chart, right, there's the soul, the subconscious mind, the houser of our thoughts, memories, feelings, beliefs, and opinions. We may have a spiritual ideal or a quality or a principle called oneness. But remember, that is pressing through and being filtered through the subconscious mind or the soul or the soil. And then we have the world of form, the body, which is always a reflection of our subconscious mind. So Carolyn says it matters because having an understanding of truth is important. There should be a natural correlation between the principle of oneness and its expression in my daily life. We all have to get to this reality to promote understanding, truth, healing, and unity. Yeah, so, you know, a lot of times we'll relate to the philosophy of oneness or the New Thought tradition as a kind of navel gazing. You know, I like to do this. Maybe you can see me. You can see me. It's like, oh, wow, aren't I interesting? Aren't I the abundance of the universe made manifest? Isn't the peace of all potentiality right where I am? Okay, I think that's spiritual malpractice. You're lovely, you're brilliant, you're extraordinary, and you have a responsibility to the collective. it could be said that if the New Thought movement only ever explores its work at the level of the individual, we are completely missing our ability to have an impact in collective consciousness. Yes, of course, right where I am, I have to take responsibility for my stuff, right? And I do that in service of the greater good, not just so I can have the best car imaginable, not just so I can get the parking spot I desire, not just so I can live in the most glorious home I desire. That stuff, once you accumulate all the stuff, you realize like, there was actually something greater, vaster, more extraordinary and exquisite I was imagining. So Reverend Dale says, it makes me sad to think the people I love are being mistreated. Yes, allow your heart to break. It is heartbreaking. You know, we cannot just deal with this ill, this dis-ease, this virus at the level of the conceptual. So racism matters to me because separation from people of color is a separation from emotional and physical wholeness, expressing divinity in our world. Yes, I'd like for you to consider that again, this is a matter of integrity. So I'd like for you to take a moment, if you would, and on a page before you, and to the extent that you're willing in the chat below, I'd love for you to write down your earliest memory of when you became aware of race. So just take a breath. Might close your eyes for a moment. Allow yourself to settle in. And ask yourself, what is my earliest memory of race? And go ahead and write it down. Perhaps describe the environment you were in, the age that you were, the circumstances that you encountered. And if you want to include those in the chat, feel free to do that. We oftentimes have a very wide spectrum of experiences. When did you first become aware of the distinction of race? I had a Black first grade teacher. She was my first teacher. I was 6 years old. And then the next question would be, and what thoughts, memories, or feelings do you associate with that experience? And this requires a level of honesty. You know, how did that occur for you? I remember when I was a little girl, I went to a predominantly white institution for school, and there was one Black child in my class. And I just remember being aware, oh, that's different. That visually appears different to me. As a child being born in the Jim Crow South, we couldn't help but know it. Back door, separate water fountains. None because it was normal to us. Then we hear, while walking with my father outdoors, I asked my father about the slanted eyes of a Chinese man who bent down to say hello to me. I was preschool age. I was intrigued. I was about 9 or 10 years old. My aunt brought 2 little white girls over to our house, and we, my sisters, were ordered to play with them. During the play, stuff came out. My aunt told us we had to get along with them so she could keep her job. Right, so we have had experiences. Infants begin to develop biases by 4 or distinctions. By 4 biases are pretty well established in children. So unless you are having robust and meaningful and appropriate conversations with young people, it's the water they're swimming in. It's the water we're swimming in. So there are conscious memories, which there's a thread here of like, 5, 6, 7, 8. but there was a world that was being developed in you long before that, as young as 6 months to 4 years of age. We are consumed and overwhelmed by media images that maintain racist narratives. So I want to leave you with this invitation before we open it up for a Q&A. Cornel West is actually he's been in the news quite a bit lately because Harvard has been unwilling to extend tenure to him, which is absurd. But that's another talk for another day. He's a brilliant philosopher, Christian theologian. He says, none of us alone can save the nation or the world, but each of us can make a positive difference if we commit ourselves to do so. My adaptation of that would be, do not allow your overwhelm of the state of racism in America to paralyze you. We each have the ability to influence our families and our communities. We have to do the work to deconstruct this toxicity and this trauma in our own body and in our own being. And then we have a responsibility to bring that awareness as best we can, realizing we may make many mistakes along the way, to the worlds that we influence, our families, our communities, our politics. You and I cannot just navel gaze on this topic. It is an open wound, and it will not be solved just by thinking about it. So I thank you for this opportunity to be with you today. I appreciate your willingness to be in this exploration with me. Unfortunately, I just did not press into this dimension of reality to be the one that brings you all like the law of attraction and, you know, like there's something different that I'm here for, but.
Well, indeed you are, and we absolutely are appreciative, and it's making a difference. This is about making a difference. I just want to throw one question at you, as some others may come about, but one thing in you, what you described, Lola, for me, we have ministers, we have practitioners here, we have teachers, all dealing with New Thought theology.
Mm-hmm.
For if we are to live our truth, it seems to me that each of us has to determine how to impact this racism, because racism inherently means separate and different and all these things, when our very basic premises, there is a God, we are one with that God, and so can you just put it in that frame, because that's why I was so excited. I'm going to let you talk. You were coming because this is taking our truth and making it our life. We're living it when we're talking about what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the thought that comes up for me is we have to be spiritually mature enough to hold multiple realities. Like, we are one. We are intrinsically connected. There is, like, we are the individualized manifestation of the Most High God. And we are having distinct experiences in this dimension of reality because we are living in race consciousness. And you know, as much as you want to be what I would call like a smart rat and think that like, oh, you're not susceptible to race consciousness, that's just crazy. That's crazy making. I would ask us, how did you, and this is a really hard question, how did you contribute to the murder of George Floyd? And specifically, I want to ask that of white identified people. You might be like, what the heck is that supposed to mean? I didn't create that. Well, no, but you did, because you saw it, right? It was in the news. I mean, it's everywhere. So how have I contributed to a society or a reality that has that be okay? I don't know if that answers the question, Reverend Jackie.
It does. It just to talk about that, to pull it apart, because making a difference, if I'm a theologian, I'm a minister, I'm a teacher, and my theology is New Thought, then making a difference falls right square into what you're describing. Yeah.
Yeah, I literally don't know what else New Thought ministers and practitioners are talking about if they're not talking about the condition, not because they're seduced by the condition, but because it is an outpicturing of our consciousness. So
It's-
like, I mean, I just am like, I don't understand the position that some take where it's like, well, that's off principle. Well, you know, my studies told me that Ernest Holmes said, don't deny that cancer exists, just recognize that it's not the truth. But to be so reckless and exercise such malpractice as to suggest that this person is not having an experience in this dimension of reality is, I mean, I have to be cautious when I talk about this, but I guess what I would say is, that just doesn't take a lot of work. That's like lazy practice. That's what I want to say. Like to just be like, well, we're all one. It's like, give me more chops. If you call yourself a practitioner of this school of thought, I want you to be a little more robust in your understanding of the world of form and how it got to be as it is.
You know, and there's a couple questions coming in, but I just want to mention the other thought deals with, you led out with this as a student of subconscious mind.
Yes.
As an African-American woman, and I've always professed that if you live in America, whether you're Black or white, every morning you best wake up, look in the mirror, and affirm your worthiness. If you're Black, you have to do that. And so this racism in the subconscious level, whether you self-identified white, to use your term, or whatever you are, you need to check out what's going on there. And that's, again, right in the heart of our theology. You know,
One of the most important books that I would recommend people read right now is titled My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. He's a somatic therapist based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he talks about consciousness, but he also talks about how the body is storing trauma. And it is, and that is true of white bodies, that is true of Black bodies, that is true of brown bodies, that is true of police bodies. There is stored trauma, and reading every New York Times bestseller book is not going to change that. So we have to work at the level of the body, not just the mind.
What's the name of the book again, please?
My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. And it's a really, really powerful read. I know many people are reading White Fragility these days, and I'm like lukewarm on that book. I've taught that book. I think there's some value to it, but I think that, you know, a lot of that work is also tailored to keep white people comfortable. And I actually think one of the things that white people have to develop the capacity for is increased discomfort. Like, you're not going to break in this conversation.
Marlene asked, oh, it was a question and it's gone. Okay.
She says, it is not okay. I shared it as not being okay on social media. Martin Luther King Jr. in a hoodie, what would he say? Well, what I would say is that I think social media doesn't make much of a difference. I actually think we can think making social media posts is a contribution. And I actually think it's sort of like performative, and it can give us a sense of accomplishment. You know, I recently had a situation with 6 white family members sitting around a fire pit in my backyard, and there was a conversation occurring that was very academic, very academic about racism in America. And I said, I will not tolerate this conversation and this disconnected examination of racism in America on my property where I pay taxes. And I'm very comfortable saying that. And that will require white people getting out on the skinny branches of reality. Like, you got to get out there, because white culture requires white people to play it safe. And playing it safe maintains this system. It is important to realize that racism, it exists at the level of the personal, but it is maintained by the level of system.
Question. This is really all very heavy. What Tell us about love. How does love fit into all of what you're speaking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think about this as a parent, right? Like if the only type of love that I provide my children with is that which keeps them comfortable, I will likely produce like reckless humans that are like have no capacity for much. So for me, love is not about comfort. Love is about this fierce fire, this cosmic force whose sweep is irresistible, nay, the very fire of the universe. So love is not about lace petticoats and chaste kisses. Love is fierce, it's sweeping, it's disruptive. Martin Luther King was not appreciated by the vast majority of people, Black and white, when he was doing his work.
Right.
We have created a mythology about him, and now we sort of like Pepsi commercials and, Martin Luther King, Pepsi commercial, woo! But, that man was doing a disruptive, radical act of love, and he was not here for a popularity contest. And that's what we have to mature into.
Reverend Dr. Joanna asks, will you talk about white people being allies to African American people? I hear a lot of African American people saying they are tired of taking care of white people. I think it is important that we are all allies to each other instead of seeing it as African Americans taking care of white people and seeing it as being allies for the dismantling of systemic racism. What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I sort of would like to hear what Reverend Dr. Joanna is meaning, because context is everything here.
Yeah.
I don't really love the term allies, to be honest. I prefer the language of accomplices. Like, we are accomplices. I think the challenge is that, and I said this in the presentation today, this whole conversation can occur like, oh my gosh, well, white people just have to help Black people. And, a good white person, if they will help Black people, it's like, no, this is a white problem. This is a white issue. This is maintained by white systems, dominant culture. It is subscribed to subtly in micro moments all the time by white people, and we don't even see it as white people. So I just think you become a student of whiteness, begin to see the implications of whiteness on you. Because if this is just about me saving Jackie, like, that is like completely missing the point. White people are deeply affected by racism also. It is what maintains the incredible economic inequity in this country.
That's correct.
Like, poor white people are devastated by racism in America, and oftentimes we don't even realize that. So this is not a Black and brown problem. This really is, it's a human problem, but white people really have to step up and really say, how am I responsible for creating this? How do I co-sign this in my own body, in my being? How do I maintain this?
I'm not sure how you think about one book, but one book that I've read that I found to be very helpful in identifying, as you're describing, is Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. Isabel Wilkerson helps you to see, oh, that's how that came about, and it becomes clearer and clearer. A question came in: how do we address the fear in white people?
I think we have to. I'm curious. I don't know who Marlene is, but I would say, as a white person, I have to take responsibility for my fear. So if I'm just bouncing around based on fear, like, if your understanding of Black and brown people and Black and brown culture is formed by the media, then you got to get off that drug, because like that's by design, right? So like, what's funny for me is I have had decades of transformational, life-affirming experiences with Black and brown people. So I literally do not have a body response of fear in and around Black culture, Black people. Like, that doesn't live in me somatically. But if you are getting your information around Black and brown culture and people from media outlets, then yeah, you should be scared.
Yeah. Reverend Jeff, we're going to ask you, I think we have a couple more questions. I have a Black friend who occasionally posts about white people in a disparaging way. I would not post these types of things for Black or brown people, but I feel like I can't talk to him about this because the last time I did, all I heard from him and others that I would never understand their experiences because I'm white. What do you have to say to Reverend Jeff?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember which course commitment it is, but I think it's like believe versus debate. Like there's a level of humility and surrender that is required of white people to just go, wow, I really hear that experience. Like, I just want to bear witness to that. I don't need to audit it. I don't need to, it's not my responsibility to critique, to criticize, to audit, to censor the experience of Black and brown people in my life. I'm actually here to be a humble witness and to tell me more. I want to know more about that. Tell me more. I want to know more about that. I'm not here to debate. I'm here to affirm, listen, learn, get curious, and then notice all the triggers that come up in me when I get defensive.
Wow. Well, Reverend Lola Wright, truth teller Lola Wright, we thank you. Another couple of questions have come up. This is going to be the last one, I guess. I'm getting the ding, ding, ding. I have Latin American neighbors who have a pig on top of their fence. My African American neighbor overreacts if I try to talk to him.
So it sounds like, Marlene, you're assuming that the pig on top of the fence, because I've heard you mention that a couple times, the pig on the top of the fence, you're saying is their judgment of you as a white person. And the question that I would ask myself is, how is that true? How is this feedback for me? What if you could take responsibility for not getting your feelings hurt and go, I wonder how what they're saying is true. How am I a pig? How could that be true? Anytime I'm arguing with feedback that's coming my way, I know that there's something defensive in me and I'm not wanting to feel something. So I am not saying, Marlene, that you are a pig. I am asking us to say, I wonder how that could be true. Or how could that be true in their experience? I wonder what would have them experience me in that way. And then my African American neighbor overreacts. And I would say that's a judgment. Like, who are you to say if they're overreacting? Could you just accept them as they are? Could you let them be as they are? Could you let them have the experience that they're having? And could you use it as a spiritual practice to be still, to be kind, to be loving, to be compassionate, to be curious? What is this here to teach me? Anything in life that we meet with defensiveness and criticism is outside of this philosophy of oneness, which doesn't mean we can't make a critique. You can make a critique, but if you are noticing a triggered and reactive response, being defensive, critical, and wanting to, bob and weave, you got to look at yourself.
Well,
especially as white people.
Lola Wright, you started off with the subconscious mind and you ended up with it's teaching you something, you need to look at it. I think you still got a lot of minister going on in there. I love it in between all of the activism. Wonderful, wonderful workshop. Thank you so much. And continue being the truth teller that you are. Thank you.
My joy. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And everyone, we are now rolling into a 15-minute break. We invite you to come back in 15 minutes so that you can be a part of the next phenomenal workshop. Remember, this is the last day through the end of this day to register for the Congress with your 25% discount. And also, we're asking you to contemplate donating to INTA, seeding your garden by donating in the multiple ways that you have to do as shown on the screen. We will see you in 15 minutes.